November of 1943, the order was issued to activate the 555th Test Platoon, and I reported to Fort Benning for duty and parachute training. I arrived at the station late 8 January 1944. I was familiar with the scene around Fort Benning. The black soldiers' first taste came at the railroad station in Columbus, Georgia. An ugly, smelly building, heavy with the racist atmosphere of the South, complete with separate facilities for white and black. These so-called, and the transportation from Columbus to the post was usually in the form of a long boxcar like buses. These so-called cattle cars would carry up to 60 men, each sitting astride a wooden bench facing the rear door. I knew I could get a taxi and chose to do so over the cattle car. The ride took about 45 minutes. There was no conversation with the white taxi driver. First call blew at 5:45 a.m. Later in the day, I took special note of the soldiers we encountered, trim, sharp professionals who had a look of pride in their eyes. I soon realized that these were no ordinary soldiers. These were the men who would be jumping with us. All enlisted men of the test platoon were already in training for their wings. First came fittings for the jumpsuits and parachute boots. I looked at the small arsenal being stacked on the supply counter. A switchblade carried in a zippered pocket close to the neck of my jump jacket, a machete, a .45 caliber pistol, a carbine with a collapsible metal stock, steel helmet, compass, binoculars, and 2 pairs of jump boots. Earlier, the door opened and a soldier entered. He was every inch the type of man one expected to see here. He approached me in one step, stood at attention, and introduced himself as the First Sergeant Walter J. Morris. He was the first black soldier in uniform to become airborne. So, here we stand, I said. You, the first Negro enlisted man accepted for the airborne forces, and me, the first officer. We smiled and shook hands. We were privileged and fortunate to be among the first black men on earth to train for parachute wings.
It was 6 o'clock, August 25th, 1945, and I was standing in the open door of the C-47 transport plane, flying at 150 miles per hour at an altitude of 1,500 feet. I was a second lieutenant in the 555th Parachute Battalion of the United States Army, all African American. I had 1 officer and 34 enlisted men under my command, and we were on our way not to fight the Germans nor the Japanese, but a raging forest fire in the Mount Baker National Forest of Washington State. The Army classified our mission as Operation Firefly. Mine was the combat training paratroopers preparing to jump into a forest fire instead of the fields of Germany. After all, it was 1945 and the U.S. was at war with Germany. The answer was simple. In the Army, in 1945, along with the rest of the nation, was a segregated society. Black soldiers or colored soldiers were relegated to serving in menial units such as truck driver, loading ships, waiting on table, and guard. I gazed out the open door of the plane. Why was I on my way to a dangerous mission that could possibly get me and my men killed? Why should I die for a country that thought so little of me and my people? Our tour of duty began at 4 p.m. when the white students left the field and ended at 8 a.m. when they returned. Day in, day out. But not on guard duty. The company slept all day. Morale was at its lowest ebb. When I introduced my plan of operations, no one really objected. My idea was to have the men imitate the white students while practicing their exercises. We could do, or try to do, everything they did, with the exception of jumping from 250 towers or planes in flight. The Army authorized the activation of the 555th Parachute Company, and I accepted the position of First Sergeant of the company. In December 1943, we were a company of officers and enlisted men qualified to jump out of C-47s. After we received our wings, we helped train 6 black officers to receive their wings. To fill the quota for a separate company, the Army requested African-American volunteers throughout the United States and the European theater. There was such an overwhelming response to the request that we soon had enough people to fill the quota. The Army made the decision to make the company to a battalion. Because most of the cadre came from Fort Echuca, we became the Triple Nickels, in honor of the Buffalo Soldiers. The battalion was preparing to move west on a highly classified assignment. Surely, we thought, this well-trained unit of 400+ men was going to fight the Japanese. No such luck. Since no field commander in Europe nor the Far East wanted colored troops mixing with their racist white troops, the Army was stuck with us. The Forest Service asked for help fighting the many fires due in part to the highly explosive bombs carried by 30-feet balloons on the high-altitude trade winds from Japan to the U.S. coast of Washington, Oregon, California, Montana, and even Canada, 7,500 miles. These firebombs landed and started fires on impact. These balloons landed in the U.S. and a few in Canada. Thousands of balloons were launched and landed in the U.S., but did not do the damage anticipated. The 555th Battalion was ordered westward to Camp Pendleton, Oregon, to begin 2 weeks training in the proper method in fighting forest fires, Operation Firefighter. Firefighting was an entirely new experience. It included demolitions training, tree climbing and techniques for descent if you landed in a tree, handling firefighting equipment, jumping into pocket-sized drop zones studded with rocks and tree stumps, survival in wooded areas, and extensive first aid training for injuries, particularly broken bones. We learned to do the opposite of many things we learned, like deliberately landing in trees instead of avoiding them. The parachute was designed by Frank Derry for jumping into heavily forested areas. Forest rangers taught us how to climb, use an axe, what vegetation to eat, and we worked with bomb disposal experts. The entire battalion was qualified as smoke jumpers, the Army's first and only airborne firefighters, which worked 7 western states and southern Canada. The roar of the propeller brought me back to the job at hand. I looked up and saw the red light turn to green. The jump master gave us the order to jump. We had arrived at our fire. All 34 enlisted men and 2 officers jumped and assembled on the ground about 500 feet from the burning trees. It rained very hard off and on for 2 days and nights, making our job so much easier. The fires cooled down, and 3 days after the ground troops arrived, we were relieved of our duties. After the war was over, Operation Firefly was closed and we became a footnote in World War II history. For the Triple Nickels, it is gratifying to know that many of the techniques and equipment tested and developed during Operation Firefly are still in use in both civilian and military firefighting missions. As I look back at the smoldering fires, I was struck with a sudden understanding of my reason for being there. Why would a black man risk his life to help this country? The answer is simple. This is my country. This is my duty regardless of the social climate, regardless of the faults. This is my country, my children's country and their children's. And it is up to me and many people of all races and cultures to fight the haters and racists to make this a better place to live.